Great.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Great to see you again. You were
Great
an
to
early
be back.
FiRe guy. You were here early on. Remember that? I mean, yeah.
I remember it. Things got a little complicated in about 05.
They did.
Yeah.
Things changed.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, we pride ourselves on seeing the guys coming up before they get picked, and you definitely got picked. I think it would be interesting to just do a quick flashback. I recall the last time we talked, and it's not necessarily a setting, but you did a kind of brilliant job of describing the universe that was coming. And we'll come back to this in a minute. But you talked all about the security issues as many more devices were kind of coming into the connection with the net, and how it looked, I think, maybe as the future CTO and software architect at Microsoft, with all these various platforms arriving. And now, here we are, maybe 4 or 5 years later, and those things have kind of happened, or they're happening as we talk.
Yeah.
So this year, this theme of emerging platforms, I doubt there's anybody in the world more qualified than you to address that exact question and to help us look forward at what the world will look like in 3 to 5 years in terms of emerging platforms. So maybe just to start with, you could give us the Ray view of how does the world look now, and how do you think it's going to shape up in a very large sense when we go forward 5 years?
Small question.
We'll dig in after this.
Yeah. I guess I'll just frame it. I'll step back and I'll kind of frame it with you folks the same way that that I've been framing it internally at Microsoft the last probably 4 years now. When I got to Microsoft, actually let me rewind a bit. I had been working on a product for many, many years that became very, very successful, Lotus Notes. I left IBM in about 97, and I had the opportunity to return to zero. You know, when you're involved in something that's moving very, very quickly, sometimes you don't really pay as much attention to the outside environment as you should. But when you return and do a startup, suddenly you can do a clean assessment of the landscape moving forward. Groove was born to the internet. I had a great opportunity for about 8 years there to really internalize what was going on and the trends. And it's materially different than anything that I had experienced before that in my career. The platforms that I had dealt with before that were really focused around the machine that we were trying to deliver. When I first came in the industry, it was the mainframe machine, then the super mini computer, the mini computer, super mini computer, microcomputer, and so on. Everything was focused on that computer. What I kind of experienced was a transformation that the center of things, the platform, kind of the one platform that from which all the other platforms connect, had become the internet. And if you really wanted to see the future of any of these other platforms, it really helped me, at least, to start by repivoting to the internet and say, how do all these other things get redefined based on this new topology, this new architecture with the internet at the center. When I got to Microsoft, that basically became my theme for change. Microsoft had, as other PC companies, had become very successful around the PC, beginning with PC as platform. What are the various things we can do to help personal computing around the PC? But in essence, what I have asked people at the company to do is to repivot and say, in a world where the internet is at the center, and yes, devices are still immensely useful, and there are going to be more and more and more of them, what is the way that we should talk about the value that we deliver to the customers? How should we reshape the apps? And as a matter of fact, this week, by coincidence, one of those efforts that we've been doing over the past few years, Office 2010, has shipped. And
we have headlines this morning.
Yeah, it's a terrific achievement for so many people at Microsoft, because in essence, what Office is we're selling productivity. We're not selling so much the software, the bits on on a PC or something. We're selling the notion of enterprise productivity or personal productivity. And the reality is, in a world of the net, in a world of many devices, if you think my goal is to do productivity, what is the role of the service? What is the role of the server? What is the role of the PC? What is the role of the mobile device, and so on? And each one contributes, if connected together into a seamless whole. Each one has a very unique role. Like, for example, the PC. I think many of you, who have done large documents or spreadsheets or things like that, it's kind of difficult to argue that use of the local computation, the local memory, the big screen that you have on a desktop device is the best editing environment that you can possibly get. I mean, that's why people do interactive games, on the PC and so on. You just want to take advantage of all that capability in front of you. However, a PC is a very personal thing. And most of the documents that we create are shared, are either meant for presentation or sharing. And the net is all about sharing. So the browser-based complement to the PC is the most natural place to share those documents or to co-edit and things like that. And when you have a mobile device, you don't necessarily need the whole editing capabilities or the whole sharing capabilities, but what you want is you want to take advantage of the fact that it's always on. It can notify you of something, that it's got a GPS. It can notify others of your location, that it's got a little camera or a microphone that in a conference room you can take a snapshot of the whiteboard and incorporate it in the scenario. So basically, long-winded answer, to the fact that we've basically repivoted our scenarios for developers, for IT, for individual end users across business, productivity, entertainment, and so on.
Hearing you talk about this reminds me of how different it is from listening to Bill 10 years ago. But I think of Bill as being a very strategic thinker in terms of our advantage, our perspective vis-a-vis Windows. And when I hear you talking, I hear about the customer. And I think that's a huge leap forward. And probably, if MS becomes the next great force in whatever it's going to be, it'll be because of that kind of switch. So I'm not trying to compliment you. I just think that was missing, and that really is important to any company trying to drive today. Let's look through customerized for a minute. The advent of the PC on a phone.
Yes.
And let's say Apple maybe put the first full-on PC operating system onto a telephone. Now Android is coming up. There's a lot of activity in that area. I saw some rather surprising numbers yesterday showing that Android actually had the second highest market share and highest growth rates in the U.S. So a lot of interest by various companies, developers. Is this kind of like Route 128? Are we going to see one more time where the thing gets smaller and the world of developer interest or the world of energy kind of moves downhill from the larger size to the smaller size? Or is it more like the way I think you just described it, where we start allocating editing tasks for this? And because it really feels like there's a potential of almost splitting, if not intellectually, by how many dollars are there in the customer's wallet and how much time do developers have for different platforms.
Right.
Kind of a split coming up.
Right.
How do you see that?
Well, as I kind of implied, the world that I see panning out is one where individuals that individuals don't shift from I'm using exclusively this one thing called a PC as a Swiss Army knife for everything I do, to using a different Swiss Army knife for everything I do. I think that the beauty of what's going on in devices right now is that with the nature of what's happened, you can imagine a device. Whereas previously you could imagine software and build it, that it was a very pliable medium, but that hardware was very hard with long lead times and so on. These days, you can basically imagine an end-to-end device. You can imagine an end-to-end device, service, and so on, and build it. And I think what that's affording us is the ability to have different types of custom device in different parts of our lives that are very tuned in some way, shape, or form to the collection of activities that we would do in that thing. So, within a car, is the car dumb or does the car have some intelligence? Well, there's probably a screen in the car, and it federates with the phone that you bring into the car. Will we have a device with us that's always on all the time? Yes. It'll be we call it a phone, but it's a multi-purpose device. There will be that, but will we also carry something of a larger form factor that we can, quickly type on? I believe the answer is, for many of us, yes. Whether it's in a purse or a briefcase or a backpack, I think that the clamshell style of laptop is a very useful thing, and it will be, with us forever. And I also believe that there are people who need desktops, and beyond desktops, I think there are people who actually use these things called TVs. I'll just summarize it at the highest level. I believe that we're heading toward a world where we have many devices. They're all appliance-like. That is, you don't have to think so much about what you're going to lose if you drop it on the floor. If you prefer a different color or style or form factor for fashion or taste reasons, you can just buy one and start using it, as opposed to worrying, how do I get my stuff from here to there? Mm-hmm. All devices will take on that characteristic, and there should be, over time, a coherent development model based on web technologies, but extended for the capabilities of devices that spans all of those devices. We use this term called 3 screens in a cloud, but what we really mean by that, there are actually more than 3 types of screen. What we really mean by that is a coherent development model that starts with the cloud, that assumes the presence of the cloud, and has a multitude of devices that you use in a very adaptive, a way that's agile and adaptive to the task at hand, that brings them all together.
Right. So when you see these, what I'm picturing as you talk is kind of multiple mountain peaks in terms of energy in the industry and how it gets allocated. Yep. Does that mean that we bring more developers on board? I mean, right now we have a lot of folks writing phone apps, small apps for phones. Are we to double the number worldwide of people writing various apps for these different appliances? And
I think right now it's kind of funny. Early in the PC industry, we as an industry, I'm not just talking about Microsoft here, we as an industry gave developers an interesting platform upon which to build businesses and to express their creativity. And that was not just the hardware that we delivered, but the entire distribution channel. You had distributors, computer stores, clubs, magazines. There was an entire ecosystem where if you developed software, you knew how to plug it in and have the checks start rolling in. You'd give half to Maricel and, et cetera. That kind of cratered over time. And the internet is a much easier, low friction delivery mechanism for software, but we really didn't replace it with a refreshed monetization mechanism for PC software. Apple comes in with the App Store, and they did a quite nice job at connecting an end-to-end experience where if developers innovated for the phone, they finally understood how they can get money. And that kind of thing, it won't have exactly that same form, but ultimately I think what we have to do is step back and say, in a world where a developer is writing an app, where there's a cloud component of that app and there are device components, what's the best way for users to acquire that? What's the best way for developers to get paid? But I do not believe that a closed ecosystem and that is for one specific type of device is the right way of going. And I think Apple's model, while I have tremendous respect for it and it's got quite a bit of momentum, is still a classic device-focused app play.
And it's a closed system.
And it's a closed system, but it's also a very device-focused play as opposed to bringing the cloud into it.
It's Steve all over again. It's just, we've seen this many times, right? You can't get the wrench into the machine. You just can't get that battery out of there. Okay, so I think if we run this forward, right now I see a bunch of silos, right? We've got iTunes with micro apps. We got, whatever Google's going to do. You guys are probably going to come up with your own version of the same kind of thing. All these are distribution channels that are separate. We've got Comcast, et al. Trying to do the same thing for themselves in different ways. And we have competing coding arrangements, content management arrangements, licenses being signed with singers and BMG, and this stuff's pretty confused. It's a time of great transition, isn't it? I mean, and I think what you're hoping to see, and I'm not disagreeing with you, is that after all the initial activity, there will at least be some layers that are either open or that are flat, so that you can write to them if you're a developer, without knowing which thing the guy's going to be holding.
Absolutely.
But that doesn't look like that tonight. I mean, it looks very fragmented right now.
Well, it depends on how far you step back and blur your eyes. Everyone, I think everyone has kind of agreed. Even though Apple has its API set for when you're writing an app and various people, I think if everyone stepped back, I don't think you find too many people who are arguing with the fact that for client development, HTML plus, HTML5, some future HTML that goes from presentation more towards storage, some future app model that wraps up HTML. I think from a programming model perspective, most people would agree that that's the direction we're headed. It just hasn't been brought together in a coherent way yet that talks to the specific devices. Apple would still rather have you code in a different way for the device, and then HTML in the browser. Google says, well, HTML is the answer for both the cloud and the device, but doesn't really enhance the device story as much as as others do.
And we've got Adobe with Flash, and developers have to figure that one out now.
And Adobe has said that they will be doing developer tools for that, for that future HTML world.
Yeah.
I think what we just have to step back. We're very impatient in the technology industry. We get very enamored with the next shiny object that that comes up. But we are really. I mean, let's get real here. How many years have any of these things actually been out? How many years have we all been using these pocket internet companions that we have? It's actually been a relatively small number of years. We haven't even seen the TV get lit up yet as a computing device. We haven't seen screens on the walls be lit up as computing devices. Every single one of these is going to be lit up as a similar kind of computing device and is going to be a target for developer innovation. And so it's just we shouldn't look at the. I think it's probably best not to look at the short-term things and confuse it for the long.
The worry would be from having seen a few markets that actually imploded because they were naturally occurring, they weren't managed, and they got so balkanized that there wasn't enough juice there to support. I mean, take news media right now. There just isn't enough juice there to support the reporters anymore, so there's no more newsrooms. Right. And even if you know that that's going to get recreated at the other end of some kind of a bridge, it can be a very painful experience if you're the developer or the reporter or whoever you are.
I understand.
Yeah.
And that in particular, I mean, let's just take that as a specific example. I encourage thinking in terms of understanding what the ultimate end game is, and then looking at the short-term steps to get there. You talked about journalism. It's my view that anything related to IP, any industry that is pure intellectual property based, whether it's music, movies, television, software, books, anything like that, there is only one ultimate end state. I think we all know what that ultimate end state is, and that is removal of friction. It's directly connecting.
Being sold for $1 in Hong Kong.
It's directly connecting the creator to the consumer or participant of that thing. Everything else that we've set up over the years has been, in terms of distribution channels and ecosystems of getting that intellectual property from source to destination, has been necessary because we didn't have ways of getting that intellectual property packaged in a form to get out there. There's huge pain that will happen between now and the end state. People say, well, how can TV be transformed? The industry is addicted to the billion-dollar checks that so-and-so writes. It's inevitable. I mean, it's inevitable that it will ultimately be that the person who has ideas about the show to create, about the book that they're writing, to in some way use the internet and the internet-based ecosystem that we create to establish a direct customer relationship and an ongoing real-time customer relationship. That doesn't mean that there isn't a ton of money to be made, but it also means that the amount of money in the system right now may just drop as opposed to the value being transferred from A to B. It could be that a lot of that intermediary value just isn't necessary anymore, and the consumer will pay less.
Yeah. Okay, let's go back to some bigger box or bigger idea, the data centers and the cloud and how that's all going to. So I want to kind of tie this together with that and then flow through that.
Sure.
The one last question on this subject. So I think you are saying that you believe that this mountaintop system will be the future, and that the cloud is one part of that story. It's a support. We'll talk about that.
Sure.
And that there isn't really. If I were an enterprise guy, where data centers first started, and I were the CIO of GE or whatever, and I'm looking at this. Do I see the world of handheld phones as an enemy or a friend? And is that integrated with my realm, or am I going to kind of fend off and worry about the security issues on phones and no micro ops in my office? How do those worlds, which seem to be kind of consumer versus enterprise, how do those worlds play in your mind going forward?
The more there is a consumer versus enterprise, the more costly it will be for enterprise. I think it's in most enterprises' interest to take advantage of what people already know and what they learn outside the enterprise. They're moving very quickly. If they come into an enterprise and they have to use a different set of tools, a different way of writing things, a different process, a different way of getting introduced to the other team members, and so on. It'll be increasingly foreign and thus higher cost because there will be help desks. When people can self-support themselves, nobody has to teach a user how to fundamentally use a telephone. You might have to teach them the dialing, conventions, but they kind of get that you pick up the phone or press speaker. The same thing is true. If people broadly know how to use smartphones, if they've bought one netbook for every member of their family, if they do this and that, and they already know how to use that. That should be leveraged. So the thing that we will deliver, et cetera, to enterprises is in essence secure virtualization technologies that enable the enterprise to deploy its apps, things that it needs to get onto the laptops or phones, et cetera, in a secure way. Make sure that they can be compartmentalized, wiped when they're on the road. For those things that have to be mobile, and then for systems that people use that are inside, to give them secure ways to tunnel into the enterprise from the outside. We have this thing called direct access, direct connect, that in essence uses IPv6 technologies to let people use their laptops on the road, and when you open up the laptop, you're on the corporate intranet, even if you're in the...
And this is playing straight to your strengths, I think. But so here's a question. I mean, the same figures, the same figures that I was recalling earlier about this quarter's sales of operating systems on phones in the U.S. had RIM at the top. And when you look at this kind of amazing story of RIM, that I've always, pager, what? It's taken me a long time to really get enough Dangerfield-like respect for these guys. Certainly respect them as business managers. And they have done an incredible thing with what I thought was a paging device. It looks to me as though there's this corporate story, which you guys are very good at, and which they are very good at.
They're very good at.
And then there's this kind of the Apple thing over here. I would not think of the iPhone as a corporate device off the top of this.
No, but they start at the edge, and we all will end up at the same place.
So let me just reframe this again. Maybe the phone world may be splitting, and if I'm the CIO of General Electric, I'm going to say, well, here are the phones that we will support, and we'll support 3 phones. It might be the Microsoft through HTC.
Sure.
It might be RIM. It might be a third phone, Nokia or somebody. Oh, you want to have an iPhone? Well, that's your private property. I'm not going to give you security on that, and you're not going to be running any of my enterprise apps on your iPhone. That could happen. Do you see that?
I wouldn't necessarily have used iPhone as an example of that because Apple is working hard. They see the opportunity there. They're working hard. We, as a vendor of management tools to enterprise, have to listen to our customers, and they have to they tell us what devices they want to manage within their environment, and we have to respond to our customers and make sure that we can give them tools to manage those devices. I can't tell exactly how it's going to pan out. But I think anyone who wants to sell devices in volume, and I think Apple's in that camp, I think Nokia's in that camp, RIM's in that camp, has to find that place where they strike the balance of putting enough enterprise manageability features into the device. This is why all of these people, Apple included, licenses Microsoft ActiveSync so that they can connect to enterprise exchange servers so that people can use our tools to set policies and wipe devices and set up those annoying, PIN codes that we have to type in when we wake up our phones. Yeah. But those are valid enterprise requirements that get out there. But it does say, to your point, it does say that if a device doesn't have those, it's not going to end up in the enterprise.
Okay. So let's go phone to the cloud. Yep. And do you want to just do cloud for 2 minutes and tell us where the cloud's going to go and what's the Microsoft or what's your personal view of cloud computing? And, Okay.
So my view is basically that when I started programming in '68, my view of computing was there was a teletype in the high school, and we typed in, and there was this prior time-sharing system. I talked to a GE 400 computer, and I wrote Fortran and basic code.
No screen, right?
No, well, it's a beautiful teletype screen. That's the future. Okay.
All right.
Utility computing, where you really don't know what's going on behind the curtains. We've had a long path by which to get here, but the fact is that now we have sufficient bandwidth. We have sufficient availability of high bandwidth between any 2 points, on the globe. And the fact is that the nature of computing is such that there are very few things to work with.
Wait. You just said something which I want to object to.
Okay, fine.
You said that there is sufficient bandwidth between various points. I live in this country called the United States of America, which has great cities like New York and Washington, D.C., Seattle, where you can't even drive in your car without dropping the call a couple times. And if you actually try to do like video, well, you just can't. So as part of this conversation of cloud services, when we look at nations and their inability to provide consistent broadband here to there.
Let's talk about that. Let me make sure that let me correct what I said just to keep the discussion on track. When we're talking about cloud computing, we're talking about the bandwidth between the back end and either some mid-tier or where a logical endpoint would be. What is the let's just say business. What is the way that if a business wanted to decide to have an email system, they might have built a huge data center for themselves because they know that all of their employees are in the same building or campus or complex as that data center, and they could buy a bunch of Cisco routers and put a bunch of cables in. Now it is feasible for us as an industry to offer them the option of putting in a fiber, a big pipe to some remote data center that is not co-located with them. We can offer them the alternative of having multiple data centers that back one another up, so to speak, or distributed workload from business to those folks. So even just staying on business for a moment, it gives our software architects the choice of how to distribute workload in ways that we couldn't do before we could just take it, assume that we could get the bandwidth, put the computation and storage where we wanted to because of these pipes. The goal.
No, wait, I want to stop us again.
Sure.
So, in addition to the bandwidth question,
Yep.
we just had an interesting situation with Google Mail in December or January. And now, I guess, through the New York Times, we found out that in addition to the email accounts in the cloud, their cloud, getting hacked, and actually China going after human rights activists in the United States, as well as elsewhere, we have the issue of Gaia, whatever it's called, their software code for passwording most, if not all, of their stuff being stolen by someone, probably in China, and now having the ability to spend all weekend, every weekend, gaming it out and trying to figure out how to get around it. And I recognize they've made some changes since that time. So if you're back to the CIO of GE, and you're saying, should I do what you just said? Should I have my own data center, or should I go to Ray's or Google's or somebody else's? Right. Does this kind of break-in affect your thinking?
If someone, you have to have a view of the regulatory environment and threat model in general. Any CIO should have a very, very clear view of the threat model. There are people who believe that setting up walls, firewalls, provides some level of protection. And it is true, it provides some level of protection. But no one can be confused into thinking that it's a panacea. There is this thing that we refer to as the insider threat that is so common. And if you have a threat model that relies upon the secrecy of information, you can't just rely upon technical firewalls. You have to understand what people work for your organization. What's the provenance of all of the changes that go into something? How many people have the passwords, the credentials to a certain thing been shared with? There are so many factors involved in systems protection, and the human element tends to be the weak point. We've had, just take Xbox Live. We commonly are threatened by collections of hackers going at the most valuable asset on Microsoft's network, which is the gamer tag, the Xbox Live gamer tag. You'll take a high-profile gamer, they've got a big gamer score, so you have 1,000 people call customer support at the same time, trying to get different bits and pieces of information, trying to social engineer the system. There are many attacks that can be made on systems. If it is not inherently true that things are less secure in a third-party data center than they are within your own data center. It just depends on the processes and practices and the technical architecture of the system in general.
It may not be true, but it may be out of your control.
You should audit it, just like you would audit your own. There will be people who still feel more comfortable having things on site. So let me just add a slight nuance to this. What is happening? What is this world of cloud computing that we're doing? The ideal is that a developer, any developer would sit down and instead of having to worry about installing an OS on buying a piece of hardware, installing an OS, installing their app, servicing the OS every time an update happens, that they just sit down, they worry about their code, the solution that they're trying to do. They understand who it's going to be deployed to. I want this many people in-house. I need it to go to this many customers and partners. I need it to go to these places in the world. They develop a model of what it would look like in a deployment environment, and then they submit this software to the cloud, and then this cloud abstraction, just gets it out there. It runs a piece of it in Singapore, it runs a piece of it in Europe, it runs a piece of it in the US, a piece of it in South America, and it dynamically shapes itself through through automation to get the solution delivered to where it needs to be delivered. This model is different than today's model. Today's model is more, when a programmer writes something, they write it for a single computer. In this new model, it's a distributed model. And so they write their code in a different way, in a very highly distributed way. Now that we're working toward this model, we can bring that same distributed homogeneous computing model back to the enterprise. People refer to them as private clouds. And it's essentially using the same highly parallel technologies, the same procurement supply chains that we use to buy those computers, and bring them back to the enterprise. And then the enterprise can decide, do I want to shut it off completely? Do I want to let a system like Azure, which is ours, do the management of my private cloud and flow workload out or in for certain workloads, but keep certain other things private? Do I feel better having the physical disks?
So we may have a hybridized system of some kind.
Exactly.
That makes sense, I think.
Yeah.
All right, we are just crossing over 10 minutes here, and I want to make sure that we have time for folks to ask questions. This just went very quickly. So we do have microphones on the floor. If you'd like to ask a question of Ray, please approach the microphone, tell us your name and what company you're from, and feel free to ask questions.
Yes, good morning. I'm Scott Gardner. I actually wanted to follow up on your discussion about friction in the distribution between the software developer and this group of appliances, and you treat it as a homogeneous base that they can program to, but in reality there's this binary compatibility problem, and I'm curious as to what you're doing to address that. I mean, Microsoft historically has had, Windows NT was multi-platform with, PowerPC, Alpha, MIPS, x86, Titanium. So what is the answer to making it completely hardware agnostic? Is it some sort of a scripting language, Java-like thing? I'd like to hear your thoughts on that.
So with the following asterisk, the asterisk being that if somebody wants to get the full power of a given piece of hardware, they will write code, they will write, custom shaders, they'll write, machine language on for drivers for a specific. With that little asterisk always present, because there will always be somebody wanting to do that. We as an industry always try to introduce some abstraction layer to make things a little bit easier. Historically, there have been many, many different interpretive systems. The most successful one that Microsoft has is .NET, which goes down to this intermediate language IL. The competitors have Java, same basic notion that there's an intermediate bytecode. The de facto intermediate language these days is trending toward JavaScript as the intermediate language. You'll never really, some people might program JavaScript, but JavaScript looks increasingly like it is IL. It is the thing which all of our tools will generate, and then there will be either static compilation or just-in-time compilation of that JavaScript, down to specific architectures. That feels as though that the direction that it's headed. And I need you to understand that I'm not really saying that this is a write once, run everywhere world. I'm actually saying something quite different. There are some things that run the same on multiple platforms, but I actually believe that, just take media. I believe that we're moving toward a world of transmedia properties. If as I said with Office, there are certain things that you do with Office on a phone that are different than you do on a PC. The same is true of media. James Cameron, if he did, Avatar some years from now, instead of delivering into a distribution channel that envisioned a DVD, for this particular thing, a shrink-wrap package DVD that got delivered out at Blockbuster, or this other version of it that went to a theater, he might design using a transmedia toolkit that basically said, I am going to deliver a avatar, the experience, and this will be the experience that gets delivered on that thing. This will be the mobile thing. This will be the part that runs on the PC. This is the part that runs on a game console. It might be a living environment. It might resemble more of a continuous service. It might more resemble World of Warcraft than it does a DVD. It might have a community around it. I think everything is going to be trending toward the notion of a cloud-centric environment, back-end, with lots of data and analytics and machine learning and things, and many, many different experience delivery devices that do some specific thing that's natural to the nature of the device or the type of consumption that you might do. I'm pointing to this because it looks like a TV. Yeah.
Do we have another question? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, Ray. I'm Al Smith from Vancouver, Canada, and I want to thank you for Lotus Notes, and I wish I was still using it. But unfortunately, I'm not.
My condolences.
The thing I loved about Notes was that the state, I felt my email was my state.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, email is not just my state anymore.
Mm-hmm.
There's way more than that.
Right.
And in my house, I manage my daughter's experience with the internet, and I'm always having their home share versus what they do on the web, trying to reconcile, passwords and things like that. I'm wondering, when you look at moving out to other devices, it's extraordinarily difficult to manage it in a PC context versus a cloud. When you're moving to other devices, do you have some plans in Microsoft's architecture to deal with just a small amount of state that moves everywhere?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. I mean,
You're going to buy a sugar sink? I'm sorry.
No. Yes, synchronization and state management is a core. Identity, synchronization, state management, policy management, that's a collection of services that I think are going to be core, will be core, are core. There are some very tricky things in balancing the federation of that between enterprise and the personal, the different facets of your life. The biggest industry-wide point of controversy right now is how independent of a service that is. There are some very significant privacy issues related to that. And at one extreme, I think some people would like a service that they can count on, but they know that no one is mining the data in that service. They want it to manage the state, but they don't necessarily want it to be used for marketing purposes or other intended purposes. And we aren't there yet. The identity systems that, for enterprises work, but they're disconnected from everything else. The consumer identity systems that are out there right now that are gaining traction are increasingly under privacy scrutiny. And I think we need to find some kind of a middle ground there.
Great. And I'll just give you my personal data point that I shared with Mark in New York, is that my BlackBerry state became my most reliable state about a year ago, and I rely on it much more than my PC state. And I think that should be a challenge for Microsoft to.
Thank you.
Thanks
This
a lot.
whole opportunity and problem of file sharing and file updating and cross-linking and making sure that's a headache now, but the cloud could solve all that stuff.
The cloud can really solve it, help a lot, because it's a central way of aggregating metadata. It doesn't necessarily mean that everything has to end up in the cloud, but the cloud can track where everything is and enable things to move as they need be.
Yeah. Maybe one last question?
Yeah.
Mark?
Yeah, sorry.
So, hi, Ray. Monica Harrington. I worked at Microsoft a long time ago and have since done more cloud-oriented applications than I was working on then. I'm curious, given the concerns about privacy, just on a relative scale, how important do you think Facebook is going to be in 5 years?
So you were referring to Facebook, now it's on the...
Yeah. Yeah. I think there are network effects that happen whenever people get together, and so given the momentum that they've got in terms of aggregating, identity and relationships, I don't see Right now I'm seeing a very solid path toward increased success. The real asterisk I have to put on there is we as a society have never had to deal with privacy issues at the scale that we're dealing with right now with when a business model of companies, and I'm actually not talking so much about Facebook right now, I'm talking more about search, writ large. When you have business models that are fundamentally based on matching intent, understanding what the user really wants, and maybe in many cases understanding the user better than the user consciously understands themselves, and matching that with advertisers and making money on doing that brokering. It's very difficult to cope with from a privacy perspective, understanding where to draw the line. And I think Facebook is doing us all a great service by pushing the edge so much that it's going to cause the conversations in the US and abroad to be very vigorous, and it's going to be very striking. I'm on the advisory board of Epic, and it's the privacy-related conversations are extremely interesting in that realm.
Diplomatically put.
Yep.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Ray.
Thank you.
Really beautiful description of the world coming up.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah.
I appreciate it.